our third and final meeting for improvements to Mission Hill Playground. So welcome. It's great to see as many people as we have here tonight. We've got 29 people so far, so that's wonderful turnout. We're very happy with that. My name is Bea Chatfield, and I am the project manager with Boston Parks and Recreation. And I'm here tonight with Kyle Zick and Danielle Desilets and Rob Barella from the design team, and Christine Brandeo from Parks. She's our outreach coordinator. And just wanted to say quickly that tonight's meeting is being recorded so that we can post it on our website, on our project page. That should be up there in a couple days or so. If you know anybody who can't make the meeting tonight and wants to see what happened, what people said, it should be available in a few days. So just to let you know, tonight is being recorded. We're going to be showing you our presentation first, and at the end, we're going to have a discussion. That's when we'll respond to your questions. So in the meantime, if you want to send us some questions, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen and just write it there, and we'll respond to it at the end. Otherwise, when we get to the discussion period, you can raise your hand, which is the button next to the Q&A, and we will allow you to unmute yourself and you can say your question or your comment yourself. I want to welcome everyone here tonight. Excuse me, I have a bit of cold. But I understand that Councillor Bach is here, so I wanted to extend a warm welcome to her and see if you want to say a few words.
Hi, thanks so much. Oh, you can see, is there a way for me to turn my video on or no? No worries.
Yes, I can make you a panelist.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Kenzie here. Really want to thank the team at Parks and thank all the neighbors for being on this, and say, I've said this before, but this property running the whole way from Tremont to Smith Street really is right at the heart of the Mission Hill neighborhood. And so I've really appreciated everybody engaging on it so far. And obviously Henry from my office and myself, we've been paying a lot of attention and really appreciating the way in which it's been shaped in reaction to lots of folks in Mission Hill's feedback, and appreciate the efforts that have been made. And I know Mary Ann Nelson's been involved, and Bea and her team in trying to make sure that all of the stakeholders who use this place are really reached out to and heard from, because we have to get it right, because it's precious and a real treasure for us. So glad to be on this now. I am still young enough that I have strong opinions about playground equipment, and care quite a lot about us getting this park right at all of its levels. And I'm really glad that we got that additional money to also address the field. So looking forward to the conversation tonight, and grateful to you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Councillor Bach. Glad that you could come and join us. So I think we will start moving through the presentation. We've got our tips here of how to use the Zoom webinar. I just covered a few of them. There's the raise hand button and the Q&A button on the lower right-hand corners of your screen. If you're joining us via phone, I'm going to explain, I don't think we have any phone participants tonight, but just in case we do and I don't see them, *9 to raise your hand, and then *6 to mute and then unmute. So do the next slide. Our agenda for tonight, we're going to go over the project status. Then we're going to recap the survey from recap our feedback that we received from our online surveys and our first 2 meetings that we've had. Go through the site designs, then have a listening and discussion period where we want to hear all of your opinions, and then our closing remarks and next steps. So here we are with our project team. I'm Bea Chatfield. Here's my contact information, abigail.chatfield@boston.gov. There's my phone number. If you have any thoughts on this, we've received a lot of thoughts and responses so far, just sent to me emailed, which is great. So keep them coming. If you have other ideas or thoughts or concerns, let me know. Christine Brandeo, our outreach coordinator, and the design team of Kyle Zick, Danielle Desilets, and Rob Barella. We've also been working with Shanice Pimentel for the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services. So her contact info is up there as well. Next slide. So here we are, we have this diagram of all of the things that Boston Parks tries to do when we redo a park. So we take care of, we're keeping all these things in mind, the City of Boston priorities, safety guidelines, regulatory guidelines, community input, obviously, as part of tonight, and the parks and recreation goals as well. And then we bring all of these things together, and the designer brings their expertise, which is strong design skills and lots of experience in the City of Boston in this case. And creates a good design. So a few of the City of Boston priorities that we look to, we've got expanding walkable access to parks, addressing equity, climate resilience, improving the health of the communities, and community building. And then the parks and recreation goals that we try and really push forward. We want to make parks accessible and available to all, create a diverse, balanced, and efficient mix of uses throughout our park system, create meaningful and inclusive community engagement, create adaptive and resilient landscapes, and promote connections within the community. So these are all the things that we're trying to do, and you guys are a big piece of that. So thank you for coming tonight. Next slide. Here we have our project timeline. We started off our community meeting 1 back in November, and then we had a second design meeting in December. We had surveys that sort of reached out to the community online after both of those. So we've been gathering the input from those this whole time. One thing we didn't show here was a drop-in session that we had a few weeks ago where we got a lot of other great community feedback. And here we are in February at community meeting 3, which is our final design meeting. Tonight, we want to hear from you to understand what it is that you'd like to see in your playground so that we can then proceed creating the construction documentation. Our goal is to have construction completed by summer 2022 so the community could use the splash pad. Next slide, please. And I'm going to pass this off now to the design team.
Oh, well, thank you, Bea. I'm Kyle Zick. I'm a landscape architect with KZLA, and I'll spend a couple minutes just giving an orientation of the park and also a quick recap of some of the work we've done to date in case you haven't been part of the other meetings. But in terms of orientation, you all know the park well from the ground level. This is a bird's eye view over Smith Street at the bottom of the screen and Tremont to the top. And the abutting uses are the Tobin School, the library, the Basilica, and then there's St. Alphonsus Hall. We think of the park as 3 different levels: the baseball field, the playground, and the passive park. So we'll show you different views similar to this. We'll also think of the park in plan view, where Tremont is at the bottom of the screen and Smith is at the top. Generally, that's north facing toward the top of the screen. But the same idea: baseball field, play area, passive use, with the Basilica, Tobin School, and the library. The site has a lot of variety. At the level closest to Smith Street, the ball field, we have a Little League / softball field, but the grass area is used for a lot of different activities. There's also great views of the Basilica from that level. When you go up a level to the playground, there are a couple basketball hoops back to back. There's play equipment, traditional climbing structures and swings, although the equipment's fairly tired. There's a sculpture / water play area that derives its inspiration from designs on the church. You transition from the play area up to the passive area, and the passive area is lawn and trees, and the trees are very well established. There's different places to sit: picnic tables, benches around the tree, individual benches. That same motif from the sculpture in the splash pad are carried out in the entry gate at the center of the park on Tremont, and also the fence. And then there's a historic fence with granite piers along Tremont Street. When we started the project, we did quite a bit of analysis and site inventory. We looked at the site circulation, what are the primary paths and secondary paths, the playground components themselves, where there were accessibility or code issues, a full inventory of all the site furnishings, that's benches, trash receptacles, fencing. We looked at the trees and the shrubs, and the good news is that the trees are in good condition and they've been pruned regularly. And then we also looked at the lighting, where there's lighting along pathways and where there's dark areas, so we can decide if that continues that same way or if we make some changes. From there, we got feedback from the public, and Danielle will tell you a little bit more about the feedback we've received.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So I'm going to talk about a few different things, kind of what we heard from the process back from the very beginning. So we had our first meeting in November and then put out a survey, and we're just kind of reviewing some of this information because it will very clearly defines how we or what we design. And so you'll see a direct correlation, hopefully, to what I'm reviewing here and what we'll present a little later on. So one of the first questions, the most important question we asked was, how do you and your family, why, for which activities do you typically come to Mission Hill Playground? And there's a whole list of maybe 15 responses, as well as open-ended questions or open-ended comments. But these are the top 6. And you can see from at least half of these, they're very passive activities. So you're coming just to eat or sit or relax on the Tremont Street, the passive level park that Kyle just mentioned, or just hanging out in the park, socializing with neighbors. And then the playground comes in, and then people just kind of passing through, or for a permitted activity, like using the ball field. So the fact that there's a lot of passive activity tells us something about how you all are using the park currently. Kyle, if you can go to the next slide. One of the other questions we asked was, were there any activities, programs, or amenities that you would like to see included in the playground, and the playground being the bigger park itself? So this word cloud kind of reflects, the bigger the word is, the more times we heard that in the responses, because these are all open-ended responses. So we heard a lot about more community-based events, having facilities to have those, specifically kid-oriented or concerts, music, other festivals. We also heard one of the more popular answers was drinking fountain or bottle filling station, because that's currently not offered in the park, or there is one, I think, in the playground. We also heard about chess tables. We understand that there is a group that comes and will bring their own tables and chairs in the parks. If we had a fixed tables that could be used or added to the park, and they don't have to bring them. And we heard that that you all are ready for an updated splash pad, but we definitely want to maintain the water feature, but we're ready for something new, something updated on the site. And then we also asked, the next slide, please, Kyle, about any must-haves for the playground itself. And no surprise here, swings are kind of always the #1 answer that everyone's favorite activity, including mine. But in addition to this, this information we heard from the first survey, which again was back November, December, since then we've had 2 kind of working sessions with students from both the Tobin School and the Mission Grammar School. And so we have some feedback from how they use the playground and what they wanted to see. In addition to this, again, updating the splash pad, making sure there's climbing structure and the swings. We also heard a lot support for group spinners, for seesaw, and for nest or group swing. So a lot of group activities, which is great to hear. We did hear a lot about basketball, both in the previous meetings and with some of the school groups in the drop-in session that we've had. So Rob will get into that a little bit later, but we do have a couple different options. We heard pretty evenly from one group that versus full court versus half court basketball, but we'll touch on that later. Then we also had, after the last meeting, we had some options, one for the whole park, for the playgrounds, and for the passive park. And I just want to touch upon that information as well, because that's kind of what brought us to the point that the designs that we're going to show you tonight. So we had 2 concepts for the whole park in general, and more about the circulation and the ball fields. Each one of these we heard pretty heavily that there was skewed towards one preferred response. So the site's concept that was preferred was concept B, which included a fitness equipment and activities. So we're moving forward with that in our designs. And then for the playground concept, the one that was preferred included the amphitheater. It also included the splash pad, but also gave it a double function as a performance space. And then we heard, even though this survey result did say that tables and chairs would be ideal for a playground, once we showed the design with the tables and chairs in there, we actually heard pretty strongly from the responses that maybe tables and chairs in the playground weren't the right thing to do. And then for the passive park, we also had 3 options there. The preferred one was the one that worked with the amphitheater, in part just because that amphitheater was such a strong desire from the community, and also that upper level provided a mix of seating and tables and chairs, and maintained the trees as much as possible. So Kyle, if you can go to the next slide. So we'll look quickly. So this is, again, Kyle mentioned that we've rotated the plan again on you, but Smith Street's on the left, Tremont Street's on the right. You can see the ball field, the playground in the middle, and then the passive park, again, to your right side. So if you slide to the next slide, we'll look at, so as I mentioned, we have 2 different options, and Rob will get into those, but those 2 different options are really focused on the playground itself. So I'm not going to dig too deep into those, but that we'll focus on now is the area around the ball field. I think the next slide has a little bit larger image. It's a little bit easier to see. So we were looking at a couple different things here. One of the things, we're renovating the Little League baseball field. We do want to make sure that we're providing as much accessibility, so this entire park is as inclusive as possible for the community. So that includes new ramp towards the back of the ball field. There is one there now, but it technically does not meet code. So we'll be updating that. And in that, when we renovate that, we have some opportunities to add a seating area back there, and we can provide some tables and chairs as requested. One of the options or one of the things we're looking at for the ball field is also to shift that fence that's there now. Right now it's on the back side, the sidewalk side of that walkway that's on the baseball terrace. So by pulling that closer to the ball field, allows more people to stand and kind of watch, spectator with some safety and security of a fence in front of you. We can potentially shift the bleacher pad to that side from the other side, and then just provide a little bit more room and a little bit more safety for people watching and the players. So one of the other things we talked about last time is providing a pathway that kind of mirrors the driveway that's there now. We won't be reducing the width of the driveway, but it will be an accessible pathway. And there's some grade change that happens there. We're still studying that a bit, but there will probably be a couple of ramp segments with handrails. But with the change in grade that's there, it will connect from Smith Street all the way up to the playground level. And we also create a little bit of a level area, a terrace area. We can provide the fitness equipment that was requested. I think those are the major elements. I think there's one more image that a bird's eye image that looks at it from kind of from the Smith Street side. So again, you can see the pathway kind of paralleling up the driveway, the aqua areas where the fitness areas are. You can see how that fence is pushed back away from the sidewalk to provide a little bit more space between the trees and the fence and the ball field. One of the other things that's key is because we have that pathway running along the walkway running along the driveway and up against the ball field, we do feel it's important to make sure that everyone is safe. So we have an outfield fence to protect from balls coming in that area. But we have left a gap or a gateway entrance so at the far end, so it doesn't meet up directly with the wall, so you can still move around that area. So I think that's the bulk of the conversation about the ball field level, and then I'll throw it back to Kyle to talk about the Tremont Street side.
Thanks, Danielle. So yep, now we're back up toward Tremont Street, which is at the bottom of the screen, and we're talking about this passive part of the park. Just for orientation, there's 3 entrances, one that lines up with the signalized crosswalk, one in the center of the park, and then one with the other crosswalk closest to the library. The existing paths all kind of come down and meet the top of the stairs, which are on the central axis of the park. There are a couple islands with shrubs there. There's a circular bench and picnic tables around the tree, and then there's an accessible route down to the rest of the park. So this is a proposed view. slightly bird's eye view. And you'll see a lot of similarities because what we heard from the community is don't change this radically. You know, we love that there's open lawn. We love there's mature trees and shade. But we also think there can be a better connection between this level and the play area, and that we can provide more variety in terms of seating options. So the left side of this park, the west side, is open lawn with trees. We're not removing the existing trees. We're actually adding more trees. And we have benches that are spaced apart and they have trees kind of paired with them. And then we have another seating area, which is, you know, a little bit, it could be for group gathering, and it can also have game tables. The other thing to point out is we've removed the shrubs for better visibility. And then with the stairs, we've added this amphitheater seating, which we'll talk about later. But here's that seating area that I mentioned that could have tables that you could eat your lunch or a snack. And then you could also have chess or other games at these tables. And we pulled the pavement away from this large tree purposefully to protect it for the future. There's also seat walls kind of punctuating the space and other places in here to have more variety and flexible seating. The western side of the park, as I mentioned, is very, you know, it's very simple. You know, it's open lawn with the existing trees, and we're adding some trees, and then we have other seating options here, and we'll be restoring the gate and piers along Tremont Street. From here, Rob will tell you more about the playground level.
Thanks, Kyle, and thank you everyone for being here. So yes, I'm going to be talking more about the playground level. And on the screen right now, this is the existing playground. For those of you that are familiar with the site, at the bottom of the screen, that's where Kyle was just talking about with the upper passive area. We have right where his cursor is there, those are the stairs leading down. And then this leads down to the center of the playground where you see the circular splash pad. You have existing trees radiating around the splash pad. And then you have all of the equipment beyond that along the left side, wrapping around to the north side. On the top right corner, you have the basketball hoops. And then down in the bottom right, you have that slope lawn area. And next slide. Okay, so as mentioned, we have developed these two options for the playground. Both of these designs achieve a number of the requested activities and programs that we've heard in previous community meetings. Like Danielle had talked about earlier, such as basketball, climbing, swing, slides, etc. And with both plans here, you know, there's a lot of similarities, and they both aim to make a really just fun and engaging playground that's inclusive and has something for everyone. So on this slide, just seeing these side by side, we'll go into more detail on each plan, but there are a few differences between the two options that I should point out in regards to the overall layout, and it helps seeing these side by side. And the first of that being the basketball court. And we've heard from a lot of people that the basketball hoops are used a lot right now, and that some people want there to be more hoops, or some even want there to be a full-size basketball court. So we've explored both of these options, and we can explain a little bit in terms of how we fit them, and then what that means to the rest of the playground. So on option A, on the left side, we have two courts. Yep, where Kyle's cursor is there. So we have these two courts, which allows us to get another large space area to the right side, just using that space as an additional area for like flexible pavement games and other activities. This option as well allows us to maintain a lot of the existing trees. So there's plenty of shade through there. So by having the two courts there, we're allowed to have a little bit more flexibility with some of the other programming in this level. Option B on the right side, it has a full-size high school regulation court. But it takes up a larger area, so we end up losing that additional pavement area for the other programming, like option A had. And then we're also losing more of the existing trees. But you know, we're still planting some other trees, so there's still some shade, but those are a couple of the considerations moving forward as we dive into these plans separately. Next slide, Kyle. Okay, so as you see here, there's a number of components that we'll go over. And with both of the options, I'll say there's a variety of play elements and different opportunities. Both have structured play, and both have other areas for kids to explore and have more imaginative style of play. So I'll start with the bottom of the slide here by the amphitheater. Yep. So as Kyle mentioned, this was a highly requested item during other meetings. So a lot of people like the idea of expanding the stairs and creating this amphitheater. So we've included this on both of the playground options. It consists of large tiered seating, and the idea is that when the splash pad is not being used as a splash pad, or that other flexible space for that multi-use space isn't being used for games and activities, it could be programmed for other types of events and performances. So the amphitheater serves as seating for that. So the amphitheater becomes a social hub that's overlooking the rest of the playground. So next, beyond there, I'll move north to the splash pad, which is in the center, which is roughly where the existing splash pad is today, but it looks a little different here. So this is still an interactive water feature. The difference with this feature is instead of the sculptural art that's coming out of it with the spray heads, all of these nozzles are flush with the idea of when the water is turned off, this space can be used to program for other events and activities. Now I'll start moving to the left and then clockwise. So in the bottom left corner, we'll start talking about the basketball area. So as I mentioned, option A includes 2 half courts. The hoops are facing away from each other, which is contrary to what they are now, where they're facing back to back. So a lot of balls are flying back and forth. So this way, we're still allowing to have 2 half courts. There's still a lot of play value in having the 2 half courts, and the hoops are facing away from each other. So there's less likely chances of balls crossing paths. You'll notice we also have a lot of these colorful pavement graphics. And the idea is that these could add a little bit of color to the site, but then also be integrated, add some play value, and then maybe kids could get creative and try integrating that into other types of games and activities as well. And it's something that ends up being unique to the playground, just kind of ties everything together. And like I said, add some extra play value there. I'll move north of the half court to the seating grove. And I'd mentioned with option A, we're retaining a lot of the existing trees, but we're also planting some new infill plantings. But the seating grove is one area in particular where there'd be a lot of shade. So we have a lot of shade seating in this area. Next, we move to the structured play, which is on the north side of the playground, which is the side on the wall that drops down to the baseball level. So on the left side, the far left side of the screen, we have the swings for the 5 to 12. We have a big structure for the 5 to 12. And then we get into some other small freestanding components, as well as the 2 to 5 equipment, which is on the right side of the screen. I should put out too, at this, with both options, the age groups separated 2 to 5 and 5 to 12, but the equipment is geared towards all ages. We have varying levels of difficulty, different motor skills, things like that. And I'll get into the equipment itself later on. Okay. Oh, and then down in the bottom right, just circling back full circle, just the pavement games. As I mentioned, this is more of a multi-use space. It's flexible by nature, and there's some seating around there. But the idea is kids could use this for Foursquare, hopscotch, gaga ball, all those types of activities, or like a reading area or a stage or anything like that. Okay, so if you go to the next slide. All right, so now we're going to get into some rendering. So we have been in plan view, but now we'll start at the top of the stairs. So if you're familiar with this site, these are the stairs in the same location and orientation as they are today. So these are looking down to the playground. You still have a lot of the existing trees providing shade here. Down to the left side of the view is where you'd have the half courts. Beyond that, further out, you have all of the structured play equipment that wraps around the back. You still have that large existing tree over on the right side. And then as you get down in the foreground, you'll see the splash pad in the center. You'll see plenty of seating around the splash pad. And then you'll get into the bottom right of the pavement games and just that large, flexible, multi-use space. And then the amphitheater that overlooks all of this. At this point too, I should mention, just because you can see them in this view, we are going to be working closely with the artists that had done the splash pad features originally. So we're working with them and figuring out the best way to integrate those back into the site as some sculptural features. Go to the next slide, Kyle. This is another angle with the basketball court. So you can see there's the two half courts facing away from each other. That's the existing stone wall with a fence on top. And then in this way, the orientation allows so that balls aren't crossing paths as often, like existing where there's the two hoops back to back. And then you can see the shade trees as well in the foreground here. And then over on the right side, you start seeing the play equipment in the back with a dividing fence for both protection and separation from the basketball area to the play equipment. Okay, next slide. This is another view of the flexible space, amphitheater, and the splash pad. So you start to get a sense of the different scale and how things have been rearranged a bit to what's out there right now. And then we get into the play area. And as I mentioned, we'll talk about the play equipment separately, but this gives you a sense of the scale. We're looking at the 2 to 5 equipment on the left side, which is the main structure. We're looking at some group and individual components that are freestanding. In this option, we have the 2 to 5 swings on like the right side of the screen here. And then in the back, there will be many more swings geared towards group swings and then also 5 to 12. And then off the screen, we're looking at more equipment for the 5 to 12 as well. But all of this is a band along that back wall. And beyond that, behind where we're looking right now will be the baseball terrace. Okay, so then there's concept B. So as mentioned with concept B, one of the main goals of this design was to fit a full court basketball court. And I should mention that this court, as we're showing it, is high school regulation. So I'm gonna start with the amphitheater seating again, down at the bottom of the screen. And with this option, the amphitheater is more or less in the same orientation, but the splash pad has moved closer to the amphitheater. So similarly with A, the idea is that when the splash heads are turned off and the water's off, this area becomes just a social hub. It's very flexible. It's used for a variety of performances and events. So I can move clockwise again. I'll start with the full court. So as I mentioned, it's a high school regulation size court, but we've managed to fit some spectator seating around there. And then also on this option, we're showing some colorful pavement graphics. Again, the idea is that they're fun, they're unique to the site, and maybe they could be integrated into games somehow. Then beyond that, we're looking at a dividing fence that protects and separates the basketball area from the play equipment. And now all the structured play equipment is starting in the back here and then swings around to the right where the cursor is going now. We have the 5 to 12 separated in the back there. On this option, all of the swings are together. So you have 2 to 5, 5 to 12, and a group swing as well, situated in the middle there. Dividing the 5 to 12 and the 2 to 5 areas, we're just separating them a little bit, is the seating grove, which would be a large planted area with some seating around it. So there's plenty of shaded seating there. And then below there, in the 2 to 5 area, we're showing a few more features like the carousel, the group seesaw, and things like that. And that's 2 to 5 area. Okay, we can go to the next slide here. Okay, so we're starting back again at the top of the stairs, and this is the view similar to where we were in the passive area, same orientation and direction of the stairs as they are today. And looking straight ahead, you see the full court on your left side. Beyond that, you see the play equipment. There's the bigger structure behind that large fence there. The play equipment continues to wrap around. You can see that planted grove in the center there with some seating around it. We start rethinking about how those sculptural posts can be reused and integrated into the planting. And then we have the 2 to 5 area in front of there. And then right in the foreground is where the amphitheater is, and the splash pad goes off to the right of the screen. Okay, next slide. This is another view of the basketball court. You can see it's, this is the full court option, and we have some types of spectator seating around there. We're also adding some new trees to provide some shade in this area to make it more of a shaded corridor going down to the play area and eventually providing some shade for the basketball court as well. Next slide. Then here's a view of the play equipment area. This is more of the structured play. So this is where you'll have 2 to 5 structures. You have some other group activities or some individual components. Beyond there in the distance, you can start to see the swings. And then over on the left, you get a glimpse of the 5 to 12 structure. Okay, so next I can talk about playground equipment a bit. So play equipment is typically separated by 2 to 5 year age range, and then the 5 to 12, 2 to 5 and 5 to 12. And we wanted to provide equipment that has enough challenges for all age groups, and then something for everyone. We wanted to have plenty of ground level activities, and then also plenty of elevated activities. And these are some of the pieces that we've talked about in the past at other meetings. And this is kind of what we're thinking at this stage, but we're still open to hearing your thoughts about this and seeing if this is kind of the equipment that you would like to see here and if you have any other thoughts. But what we're thinking is that there's what's considered a main structure for the 2 to 5 and a main structure for the 5 to 12. And then there's swings aside from that. And then there's also some individual components here toward just individual use or group use. So on this slide here, we're looking at the main structure for the 5 to 12 year age group. So where the cursor is there, the structure is basically 2 towers on the left and right. There's a plethora of ground level activities going on below it. And then there's some elevated play as well. So connecting the 2 towers is this elevated bridge. You have a slide on that side as well. And then you have one really big slide going down the left side. Next slide. So then similarly, this is for the 2 to 5 year main structure, where there's a few towers. So there's some elevated play. There's a lot of stuff going on down at the ground level. And then there's plenty of climbing and other types of more adventure kind of play as well. And this option as well, there's a couple slides. So this is age geared for 2 to 5. The last one was for the 5 to 12. But in both of these pieces of equipment, there's a lot of play value and a lot of different activities and different motor skills and things like that these achieve. Next slide. Here's some of the other play equipment that we've been looking at. It's a mix of equipment geared towards individual use or group use. We're considering these to be freestanding, so they're not part of the main structures themselves, but they're still integrated into the playground space with all the other structured play. Just starting at the top left, we start looking at some group spinners, whether they're carousels or we're looking at spring riders. It could be for one kid or 2. We're looking at different types of motion. If it's something overhead or something that you can spin around on the right side, maybe a bunch of kids can use that at the same time. And then on the bottom, we're looking at different types of swings. We'll have the traditional belt swings. We can have bucket swings. There's a group swing on the bottom right. And then on the left, there's one for 2 people. So there's different types of swings we can look at as well. Next slide. And similar to equipment, it's not in the playground, but it's still play equipment. We're looking at a fitness area down in the baseball field. So that fence at the bottom of the screen there, that is the outfield fence for the 200-foot extent of the baseball field. So in this lower level of the park, we have the fitness area back of that corner. And the equipment that we're showing is stationary outdoor fitness equipment. And this creates a full circuit of more traditional exercises like pull-ups, sit-ups, crunches, and stretching and things like that.
Okay. So thank you guys so much for that very clear explanation of what we're talking about. And we are going to start our listening and discussion section now. We're going to have the slide in the background be the comparison plan for the playground, showing the two different plans that we really need to hear back from you guys tonight as to what you want to see. Because right now our understanding is that the bottom level along Smith Street is, we think it's pretty clear, and we hope to hear from you if we're not getting something right. But and the top level as well, you know, we can talk about the design there, but we definitely need to leave this meeting tonight with a clear understanding on this level. So I'm gonna open up our Q&A here. We had a number of questions that were asked during our presentation. So we're going to start by responding to some of those, and then we'll sort of toggle back and forth between if anybody has a raised hand. So we'll do a Q&A question and then a raised hand question, assuming there are people who are raising their hands. So we're going to start off with Marianne Nelson's question. She asked, what is the increase in paved area in the upper level of the park? So if we could flick back to perhaps that slide that shows the upper level of the park, there is actually I'll let the design team. Rob, do you want to talk about this? Maybe in plan view,
Yeah.
I think it's most helpful.
Actually, yeah, Kyle, stay right there. So here, so I don't have like a square footage number offhand, but I can at least reference these as some general comparisons that might help explain this. So we're maintaining the pavement walk right where the cursor is, following around there, and then ending at more of that overlook area. So the pathway is actually more or less in a similar orientation. The difference is we're removing those two planters there and expanding that a little bit. And then where the pavement's wrapped around the tree, we're just pushing that pavement away from the tree to improve the quality for that tree's growth long term. So in terms of an increase in pavement, there's not really much at all. And then we end up adding a lot more infill tree planting throughout this level. So Kyle, you can go to the next slide. And we can look at so similarly, the paths are more or less in a similar layout in terms of size of impervious surface.
Okay.
I hope that answered your
question. And Marianne, if it doesn't, just feel free to raise your hand and you can ask the question yourself or put it back in the Q&A. Christine, do we have any raised hands?
Yes, we have one. One second, sorry.
All right,
You can unmute yourself.
okay.
All right, we'll come back to her and I will let someone else.
Is there another raised hand, Christine?
Yeah, I'm letting someone else know. Allison, you can go ahead.
Hi, I probably have a lot of questions, but just on this slide and the question that was just asked about pavement, I'm looking at the table and chairs. Is there a comparison you have for what the existing seating is versus this plan? I'm thinking of people who want to use Wi-Fi in the park. Remember that the library is has a hot spot for sharing Wi-Fi on Tremont Street. So if you have a comparison of the number of seats available in the future plan compared to existing.
I can answer this. I think the seating is actually pretty comparable. There's 2 benches on this side today. There's 3, and there's a few benches in the area of those 2 planters, which is being replaced by these seat walls. And then there's the circular bench and picnic tables that get replaced almost equivalently here. So it should be very similar.
So the circular bench around the tree is going away, is that right?
That's right. We think it's the right thing to do, to protect the tree for the long term.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go to the Q&A again. Cindy Walling comments that these two options were not presented in the December and January survey. What happened to the splash pad sprinkle park? So sometimes the contrast between a rendered plan, which is what these are, versus sort of an initial sketch is surprising. And so the plan that we're showing for option A here was one of the plans that we showed in our second meeting, and that ended up in our second survey. So it might not look exactly like it because the lines are cleaned up and it's very crisply rendered. But this is, you know, we had sort of said before the meeting in our communications that we're going to be sharing another plan that was not part of the design development, and that is option B, the full court basketball, because that was something that we had never drawn it before. We had never included it in our plans, but we heard enough community feedback supporting this idea that we are now bringing it up at this last meeting. So that is why we are eagerly waiting to hear if people support that idea or if they don't think that it's a good idea to have full court basketball. So I think Braden Falaise would probably support full court basketball because his Q&A says, can we not have two half courts because then we'll bump into each other? So Braden, I'm counting your vote for full court basketball. And Marianne, sorry, this is another basketball question, so I'm gonna just keep going with this. Marianne asked if the high school size basketball court is smaller than a full size NBA court, and the answer is yes. And if the design team could share those exact dimensions, maybe that would be a help to understand that.
The high school regulation size is 50 by 84, and the NBA size is 94, so it's an increase in 10 feet lengthwise. So it gets a little tight because of the existing wall there, and then also trying to fit in some of the other play equipment.
All right, so perhaps we will go to some raised hands if people
Cindy
have.
has her hand up.
Oh, hooray, I finally unmuted myself. Thank you. Gosh, these don't look anything like what we looked at the first two meetings. I feel like it's the first time I'm here. We talked about basketball, but it was in a very ancillary fashion. Now this is a basketball court with playground equipment sprinkled around it.
Well, we have our two options, right? And so the one that's on the left-hand side, option A, was one of the plans that we discussed at the second meeting. And it showed, I think we had two half courts.
I think it was a climbing structure, actually. I tried to go back and look through the survey.
I think there were a few options. Design team, do you want to talk about?
Maybe could we see the original options?
I was just gonna say that the options that we presented at the last meeting that were in the survey, those are very conceptual, and the goal of those is really to get out a couple of big ideas and try and get feedback of what the community was really looking for. And now, since we heard very clearly that this relates to option C, which is the one with the amphitheater, to maintain some of the existing trees, and to have the splash pad kind of reused and have a double use as a performance space. So it was taking those kind of big picture, kind of bubbly ideas and creating an actual design out of it. So this is the next iteration from what you saw at the last meeting, based off of the feedback that we heard then and from the survey.
Okay, sorry, I misspoke.
I think they're wildly different. And I think that anybody that sat in the first two meetings, the two meetings that happened in December and November and December that were drop-in sessions, basketball was always a part of it, but it was never the central part of it.
Well, is having it the central part of it something that you take objection to? If it is, that's completely fine. And this is why we want to have this discussion because, you know, it wasn't something that we drew before, but we heard back from many, many people that this was something that was,
I think basketball came into the conversation when we were informed that the parking lot behind the library was part of the park, and we thought that was an excellent option for a relatively full-size basketball court. The basketball court was never central. There was a climbing structure. There was the option of the splash pad looking over the field. There was the option of the swings looking over the field. Now it all feels very, it feels like a park that is not a multi-use park. I feel really deceived by these. I'm just shocked, I'll be honest.
okay, well, I'm sorry you use the word deceived. That's pretty strong, and that is certainly not our intention. You know, I think that the design on the left is, you know, say what you will, maybe there was a design leap that was made there that you don't feel that you were brought along with. But I think the option A is more of a continuation of what we had been talking about without the full court basketball, and option B obviously puts basketball as a central option to the playground. It sounds like you're not in support of that. So that is
Yes,
good.
you could count me as not in support of a basketball court dominating a playground that should be available to children of all ages and not a high school sized basketball court.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. We definitely appreciate hearing that. So we've got Allison Pultinas in the Q&A saying, can you talk more about circulation, how Tobin students walk to the library, what are the safety improvements to the driveway, and how the Tobin School enters the Smith Street field? So if the design team wants to walk through that.
I'll talk about that. So in overall circulation, one thing we heard from the community is that they really wanted a path that would connect Smith and Tremont through the park. A real an improvement we want to make is make that walkway separate than the driveway to the parking lots. So that's what this gray line next to the driveway represents. It's a separate walk that is raised, and there's a curb separating that sidewalk from the drive. And that takes you up to the level of the playground and the playground entrance. And then to continue to the other levels, no different than today, there's the accessible route that makes that grade change. There's also the stairs that would remain, and then they get expanded with the amphitheater seating. Now, if the Tobin School comes out to use the field, there's the gate where there's a gate now that you come through the outfield fence and use the field. And then they can also use the sidewalk to come to the playground is in addition.
Thank you, Kyle. Allison also had a question about reusing existing stone walls. Where is it happening, and can you avoid imitation stone? We do not have any plans to use imitation stone, and we will be reusing and in some case repairing the existing stone walls if they are in need of repair. And the budget for this project, the construction budget is a little bit more than 2 million. She says, I remember someone saying 4 million. It's not 4 million. We received a $400,000 grant to address the lower field as part of this project. Before that, we previously had the money was only intended for the playground and the upper level. So because of the $400,000 grant, we can address the lower level as well. So that added a significant chunk of funding to our project, which is fantastic. That was one of the state park grants. The only challenge of receiving that grant is there is a timeline involved with that. So we need to be completed, substantially completed with construction as of May 2022. So that is why our project has been really trying to push ahead and involve as many community members as possible, but trying to stick to our design schedule. So maybe the 4 million that you heard, Allison Pultinas, it was the 400,000 for the grant. So let's go back to some raised hands.
Katie, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Katie Genovese. I live in the neighborhood. I also have two small children. I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. We spend a lot of time at the playground. It is pretty central to us. And I have to agree with Cindy that I'm a little taken aback, particularly by the option B, which really very much feels like a basketball court with some playground equipment on the side. Now, whereas for all its imperfections now, it is currently very much a playground space with a lot of play-focused stuff. And I was really looking forward to things being a little more play-focused. You know, there's definitely some good things I feel like an option A, although I do have some concerns, and maybe this will be different in person in the mock-up. It looks like there's a lot of fences and that I can envision small kids, including mine, sort of barreling around and running into fences. It's a lot more separation than I would expect for a playground. But again, like I have a pretty big concern about, it seems like a lot of playground stuff sort of got scrapped to make room for basketball in both options, but particularly in option B. But even in option A, you know, I was really hoping to see one of those very tall climbing structures. I know that was on the table for a while. My kids would go nuts for that. I can't imagine they'd be unique in that. And, you know, I was hoping to see something a little more play focused overall.
So maybe maybe the design team can talk about the need for fencing and where it's required, and some of the climbing features that are going to be included in the play structures. Katie, I hear you, and the option B definitely gives over space to full court basketball, and that is why, you know, we thank you for sharing your opinion on that. That's completely valid and valuable to hear. It is a large area for this type of program, and it does mean that other areas of play basically get consumed by that use. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. That is very important to us to hear. So if the design team wants to talk about some of the specifics that Katie asked, that would be great.
Yep, I can talk about the requirement for fencing. Because the playground is close to the parking lot and the driveway, it's required that we have fencing. So the playground is in both options enclosed by fencing. And that also keeps, I mean, it's helpful from a standpoint of if you have kids within the space, they're not leaving the playground to go onto the basketball court or somewhere else. They're in the playground. In terms of the climbing elements, you know, one thing I would point out, you know, Rob mentioned the 5 to 12-year-old climbing structure and the 2 to 5, and he had the examples of those things. And I'd be curious if Katie could clarify. I know this is a large climbing structure, but I don't know if that meets her definition of it, or if you're thinking of something else.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. I'll be honest. That's a pretty cool climbing structure. I think my kids would like it. You know, there was definitely some talk at the beginning of one of those big rope things, you know, maybe someplace where it had a view or something. And that was an idea I was really interested in. And I'm just sorry to see that looks like it didn't fit into any of the final designs.
It was a balance. Parks, you know, we try and create things that have as much play value to as many people as possible. And we were looking, you're right, at one of those sort of rope climbers. One of the issues with that is having to do with accessibility. And if you are mobility impaired, there is almost zero play value for you to do that. Another issue is if you're doing a net climber, takes up a lot of space and the activity is really climbing the net. If you have a climber that is integrated into one of these larger pieces of multi-play equipment, like what's on the slide right now, you know, there are other activities that you can do if climbing isn't your thing. So we definitely looked at a lot of different types, and that's good to hear though, that your kids would be really jazzed about the more climbing exclusive activities. Thank you for sharing that. If we go back to Allison Poltinas asks if the dugouts are still in the plan for the ball field.
They are. We have players' benches. We have the fencing separating the field of play and where those players' benches are. And Danielle had mentioned we were suggesting moving the one set of bleachers from the St. Alphonsus side, first base side, to the third base side.
Okay, and a couple of other people have asked, when will this park be done? So I'm just going to jump in here again from the chat. Zaria asked, when will this park be done? And our goal is to have it substantially complete by May of 2022. So that is the answer for that. So if we could go back to some raised hands, perhaps.
Henry, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Henry Santana here. I just want to, I respect everyone's, actually, can we just go back to the option A and option B of for the basketball court?
Yeah, let me, hold on. Almost there. Yep.
I just wanted to touch base on this because I think some people are a little confused as to how we ended up here. I think it's important to mention, I mean, I know you did mention it be about the last meeting we had, but also important to mention the people and the representation that we did have in that meeting, which was, you know, students from the Tobin, students from Mission Grammar, and also people from, students from who grew up in Mission, Maine, and people who also attend the Tobin Community Center, who really advocated for a basketball court. So, and I don't think, they weren't in the previous meetings before that, which is why the basketball court wasn't brought up. But I want to make sure, as you know, we're thinking on how to recruit this or change that. I don't want those students who did come to the last meeting for their voices to go unheard, because there was a big push for a basketball court, and I think the design team came back listening to those voices. And at the end of the day, we want to create a space for, you know, for everyone, and want to make sure that those kids are being heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. There's another question from Maggie Cohn. Can you talk about lighting in the park?
So I can talk about lighting in general. Let me just go to this view. So today, generally, the Passive Park is very well lit. It's, you know, lit as equally as Tremont Street is. Lighting continues down the accessible route. When the splash pad lights are off, there's no lighting in the playground currently. And there are lights coming from the Tobin School that, you know, illuminate this path. And then there's lights on Smith Street, but the field is dark. And I think in the proposed plan, will probably be fairly similar. You know, the Passive Park will maintain its current lighting. There's one dark spot that we need to improve. I think we can have more consistent lighting along this proposed walkway that's separate from the drive. But there's currently no plans to light the baseball field, and generally Parks doesn't light playgrounds.
So should we go back to hands up?
Gary, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. A lot of talk about the different plans. And again, this is a challenge, I think, for the design team. So I want to thank them for a lot of their thoughtful, trying to meet as many needs as possible with what's going on. There has been some changes, but it's interesting to see how you managed to balance everything. This was mentioned in the chat, but I just think for the rest of those who haven't seen in the question and answer, one of the concerns that I think was raised in a couple of the meetings, and I think certainly offline and some comments back and forth, regards the parking lot that is behind the library. So this is a good view for it. That's behind the library currently, that is actually part of the park. I think there's been discussions by some members of the neighborhood to restore this back to the park, because it actually is part of the park. So I know there's been some concerns that this is used by the teachers at the Tobin. Currently there, if you're standing on Smith Street facing the Tobin School, there's a parking lot with an entrance to the left of the Tobin School that's locked at night. There's I think about 6 or 7 spaces in there. There's also the lot that's right adjacent to the Tobin School, as well as this. And so in some of the back and forths that we had regarding this, there was a suggestion that teachers use the overflow, that is overflow space, and for other reasons. In keeping an eye on this space, and I know it's during COVID, so things are different, this parking lot, the one that's behind the library, is more used than either of the two school lots, even during school days, which suggests to me that maybe or maybe not, I don't understand, but it would seem like people other than people who are using or working at the school are parking there. You see cars parked there with out-of-state plates. From my personal experience, none of my kids' public school teachers at Boston Public School worked from out of state. So even if we take for granted that this might be used for teachers for parking, one of the things I thought that could be useful was using this space in addition or having a flexible use of this space. So if teachers are using it for, say, 8 o'clock till 4 p.m. on school days, 9 months out of the year, that leaves a summer spot for which essentially is being used by people who are working across the street to just park in whenever they choose. So there has been there's been discussion about it. I just think that this would be an opportunity to right the wrongs of choosing parking over park space. We have an opportunity with the hood up on this park to look at this space as something that could get restored back to the park, that could be useful space either for just flexible space for what have you. One of the suggestions I had after I think the first meeting when I think many of our members of the community found out that this was part of the park was actually making that a basketball court. So it wasn't a choice between a basketball court and a climbing structure. It was an and that we would make this a parking lot. And actually, if anyone who's been in that parking lot during this time period looks, you can actually see that it had been painted as playground space and it has now been converted to parking. So I know this has been answered. I know it's been discussed by some groups, but I think it bears repeating an explanation in a public forum of why it's valued more as parking for only part of the year than rather than turning it back to the community that it's.
Sure. Thank you for bringing that up, Gary. Yeah, there was a big conversation about that, and you're right, that parking lot is technically part of the park. And if we were starting from scratch, we certainly do not advocate adding parking to a park that doesn't have it. But as it is right now, both of those lots are heavily used by the school. There are many reasons why we don't want to require them to park on the street. If Smith Street has a 2-hour requirement, I think teachers would have to run out every 2 hours and move their cars. We don't want to ask them to do that. We also heard from the community that there is a need for event space to be had in this park, which we would like to provide for. Given the slope of the park, it would be very difficult for anyone planning an event to try and unload, say, sound equipment on, double park on Tremont Street and then run down the path with your speakers, that kind of thing. There are multiple, we furthered the discussion sort of saying, well, what if we put in, sometimes it'd be the parking lot, sometimes it would be play. That's not a good idea. We don't want to share play space with parking space, because what about the one time someone doesn't remember that it's no longer parking and they drive their car in? Are you going to have a manned gate? Parks Department has a very limited capacity to monitor these things. Right now, I understand other people are using the parking area. We could dial 311, when you see that kind of thing, but we simply don't have the personnel to staff that kind of thing. I understand what you're saying. Parks are not intended for vehicles. But right now, this is what we have there now, and we're going to work with it. It is something where we don't want to impact the teachers negatively, and we think that the parking lot serves enough of a purpose for the park's function that we don't want to impact it. But I do appreciate your bringing that up. Thank you, Gary. I wanted to address Martin Beinborn on the Q&A. He says, regarding upkeep, can you comment on the distribution and availability of trash cans? Will those be accessible, emptied during regular trash pickup days? Will a bathroom be accessible in the public library next door? So trash cans, I don't know if there's any plan on increasing the amount of them. And I think they're distributed sort of throughout the park. I think that there's at least one on the upper level and one on the playground level. And the Parks Department cleans them as necessary, I think. If they aren't, you can let me know and I can give our maintenance guys a nudge. We do not have a bathroom available in the park. So I think that users for the park who need a bathroom, yes, you probably end up going to the library, but we cannot include a bathroom structure as part of the park. That would significantly impact the time frame and certainly the budget for this park. So I hope I answered your question. If we want to go back to some raised hands.
Your Councilor Bach has her hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, so a few comments on this. I'm just going to run through a bunch of things. Definitely starting on the Smith Street side, I think we talked about that like seating area. And I just was wondering if you guys could focus in a little bit more on what that looks like. I'm just trying to understand, is it seating that will be accessible to people who are not there for a game or just kind of there to socialize together? And if you guys could just, I don't know if there's a zoom in on it or anything.
We don't have an enlarged plan of that, but that was the intent, that seating is available if there's a game or not a game.
Okay, good. So it's not, I just can't quite tell at this size of the image, like it's accessible straight off the sidewalk, right? It's not like you have to.
There's an accessible ramp or stairs because of the grade change, but we think it's fixed seating. It could be tables with seats that are attached, or so, you know, because we heard about gameplay along board games along Smith Street. So we thought this is an opportunity to formalize that. And also if people just want to socialize, you know, it provides that opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think we talked about the fact that there are a lot of folks who, you know, from the Mission Main development who kind of hang out along the fence right now, and people sort of awkwardly perch where there's nowhere to sit. And it's a clear sort of desired gathering spot. So I think it's great to have seating there. And in the category of seating, I also wanted to flag my strong agreement with the idea of the amphitheater. I think we talked a lot, and when I talked to people early on, one of the things I heard was about feeling like that whole kind of retaining wall area where the stairs go down, like the area on both sides being a little bit like wasted space. So I like the idea of using that slope for people to sit and see things. And so just wanted to appreciate that feature. On the parking lot front, I think, Gary, we exchanged a little bit of email about this, but I mean, my instinct is the same of like, we don't need parking in a park. And I still think that in a long-term sense, it would be good to really look at that use. And I also think that, like, you know, we could do it with some more time, we could do a real survey of what's the utilization by the Tobin teachers and how do we think about alternatives, you know, so that we could recapture that space. I think I had a lot of conversation with the commissioner about this, and a few things kind of came up. So one is just this issue of access, and then the problem of it once we're providing access and turnaround for big trucks and equipment and stuff, in order to access the playground level, you have to keep most of that paved in order to do it. And so you're sitting there with the pavement. And I guess, and I hear the parks, my instinct also, like yours, is let's just paint it and use it. Certainly the parks professional instinct is don't mix up cars and child space, and that's not something that tends to be a good idea from a safety perspective. But I think that the definitive things for me were twofold. One is that because it wasn't budgeted in the scope, like the budget for the park didn't include all this additional square footage. And I think, and so that's a capital budget thing. And like we can, and, you know, I think we can take another bite at that apple. But I think that it will be tricky to add more in for this on this timeline. I also think it is a self-contained enough thing that if we can make progress in our conversations with the institutions, with the library and the school, and think about how to repurpose this, like, to me, this doesn't feel like something that we're necessarily abandoning by not doing it on this time around. And then the other thing that I want to appreciate from the project team, because I did talk to them a lot about it, and I know this is something I think Allison and I have talked about, but like, I have felt very strongly for a long time, like, the pedestrian coming from the Smith Street side doesn't feel sort of invited into the park, because you're sort of walking on a driveway, and there's this way that it makes the cars feel predominant. And so I really appreciate the pathway there and kind of creating a clear pedestrian path for everybody, that feels like, you know, we're prioritized in accessing the playground on both sides. So that's definitely something that I know came out of our conversations about this too. So, you know, I just want to acknowledge that it's certainly true that I've gone back and forth a bunch with the commissioner on this. And I wouldn't necessarily close the door on that conversion long term, but I think it's probably, there's some institutional and logistical planning and some money that needs to be found, and kind of a, and I do think it's separate enough that that's a conversation that we can keep having as a neighborhood. On the full basketball court, I'll just say I'm really torn. I want to echo what Henry said, which is that we have strong desire from the teenage folks in the neighborhood that we have talked to for a full court basketball court, and that's consistent with citywide. You know, a real feeling that there's a lack of those for people to use recreationally. They're often very hard to site because neighbors don't want them next to them because they don't like the bouncing noise. So a site like this that's surrounded by institutional uses is actually pretty handy for that. And we have heard a lot of advocacy from the young people. And one of the challenges we're always working with these evening meetings in the middle of the week is that we don't tend to get the same, you know, young people voices at them as we do if we go directly to, like, you know, the youth groups, the schools, et cetera. So that's, you know, that is a real thing in the mix here. And I appreciate Henry for both reaching out to a lot of the young people in the neighborhood in consultation with Parks, and also raising that tonight. I do feel like, and I heard this, I think, in a couple of comments, Cindy's, and also, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on your name, starts with a K, like mine. But I do feel like in option B, I don't know if you can toggle to it. They're like, you know, to the side by side. I do agree that there's something about this orientation that feels like the basketball court is kind of like pushing the other uses to the periphery. And I think that's part of what people are reacting against. And I would be curious to hear from the project team about whether you thought at all like about other orientations for it. I mean, I'm thinking even if you came down the stairs, if the basketball court was pushed to the far, what would it be, north of the site where the 5 to 12, like if it was, yeah, kind of over there, like such that, because there's something about the play space forming an L around the court, and then also the height of the fence on the court, that together do contribute to that sense that like the playground's kind of working its way around the court. So I do want to give voice to the fact that I feel that too. And then the other thing is I would actually like to continue to hear a bit more from people about kind of other play elements that they're hoping for in this that feel like they're getting sacrificed. I mean, I am with the majority of people apparently in that my number one priority for playgrounds is swings. But I, and you know, that was always what I loved as a kid, and would still love as an adult if it were socially acceptable. But I heard the rope climbing kind of tower. It would be great to hear a little bit more from people, because one thought I had was, you know, have we evaluated in option A, obviously we're putting a bunch of space into that kind of hardscape, those hardscape flexible uses, Foursquare, et cetera. I don't actually know what the kind of triangular hexagonal design is, whether that's just whimsical or if that's for like an actual specific game. But it would be good to kind of talk a little bit about those. I, again, played a lot of Foursquare as a kid, so I'm sympathetic to that. But I just I do feel like we're trying to achieve a lot of things here, but I also really do feel like there is enough space in this playground for the kinds of things that people are dreaming of. And I think obviously you've heard that the splash site is an important piece of that, but I want to get a little bit more of that, what people feel like is missing, kind of aside from the geometry of it, out on the table tonight, if that's possible. So those would be my comments and questions. Oh, and then the last thing is I actually really, somebody mentioned the seating and comparison up at the top. I don't know, can you go quickly to the top level again? Yeah, this exactly. So I would actually echo, I think the current tables are bigger. Like the thing about these tables with the fixed chairs is that they're really like, you can have a group of 3 or you can have a group of 4. And if you happen to show up with a group of 6, you're sort of in trouble. And the ones that we have right now, there's more of an ability to kind of squeeze. And the tree bench does that too. So I definitely, I want to protect that big mature tree. I think it's a huge asset for this park. And I think I hear the idea of sort of pulling the seating away. But I do want to make sure, to Allison's point, that we're talking about seating that's like sufficiently flexible and can accommodate. I mean, we heard, you know, the school classes from the Tobin that might come sit there, or kind of groups from camp or whatever. I just want to make sure that we really are replacing like for like with seating. So that's a scattershot set of thoughts for me, but would love to hear some more about kind of particular elements that folks feel like we really need to incorporate. And then I just want to acknowledge that the trickiness of balancing on the fact that definitely we have heard in outreach to a bunch of the like groups of youth that interact with this space an interest in full court basketball. So I think that's part of what we're weighing out tonight. So thank you, B. Sorry to go on for a while.
Thank you for your thoughts and nudges, Kenzie. That's very helpful. That is very good. So echoing that, if you guys have any thoughts on any of this, but specifically, you know, layout, play equipment, please share your thoughts. I'm noticing that there is someone who left a comment, John, and also has his hand raised. So maybe we'll go straight to him.
One second, I'm just taking a call. Okay, you're right. Hi guys, this is John Jackson. And I kind of like want to piggyback on some of the stuff that Henry said in regards to what the young people would like to see. But let me just say this. I think if we're going to, I'm looking at A and B in regards to, I'm going to talk a little bit about, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the benefits of the full court versus the 2 courts. So to have 2 hoops out there, even if you go one side and one to the other, there's no benefits to that. The benefits is if you're going to do 2 courts, you got to do a full court. And let me tell you why. So you got to do a full court because, for one thing, you can divide the court in half, and let's say if the Tobin school's out there, one group can go on one half, one group can go on it, and you can kind of evenly split them. The other thing is you can kind of get, like, so let's say if I wanted to do soccer, so we can bring 2 nets out there and we can get some soccer going, so we can have an even game of soccer. But also we can bring a portable tennis net out there and we can do tennis. I'm saying if we're gonna do 2 hoops out there, it's beneficial to do a full court versus the 2 split courts. You'll get more out of the space if you do a full court. I'm just saying, if you're gonna do 1 hoop, that's fine. But if you're gonna do 2 hoops, you gotta do a full court because you're gonna get more out of it. I'm thinking about just the community center side, us doing Saturday morning, offering Pee Wee basketball in the mornings, on Saturday mornings. Andrew, my soccer guy, doing soccer clinics out there and outdoor versus being in a hot gym. There's just so much more we can do with a full court versus just kind of 2 hoops. And so I really want you to think about it in an aspect of not just a full court basketball court, but the multi-purpose court that can do more if you got it elongated versus you kind of like having one half and then the other half kind of, you know. So I just want to put that out there. It's more, to me, it's more beneficial in my experience and my work. You can do more with a full court and get more out of community work done through a full court than those courts, the two hoops. So that's my spill.
Thank you so much, John. That is very helpful to hear. The other thing that we were thinking with the full court, you know, if there are community events that want to be, you know, that could be held, that we were thinking for option A would be either in the two courts, or, you know, you could have a community event in the full court as well. So lots of options for that larger space. I am also seeing another John here who said, I think when I pictured basketball being added, I imagined it being in the lower part of the park, possibly even cutting into the baseball field. I understand if that isn't possible, some concessions have to be made, but it does feel like a lot is trying to be squeezed into a small space in the middle level. So we hear that it is trying to be squeezed. We're trying to accommodate as many things as we can. He also brings up, if reclaiming the parking lot is something that could potentially be addressed in the long term, would turning that into a basketball court later be easier than turning it into a playground later after squeezing a basketball court into playground? Those are great ideas. Later can mean a lot of different things. And so I think, you know, it could mean 2 years from now, it could mean 10 years from now. I think we really need to focus on what is appropriate for our playground right now. And so I'm happy that you're thinking of all the different options. But I think we need to focus on the design that we're talking about right now. I'm looking at the time here and it is 7:29. So we are getting close to wrapping up.
You have one person left with their hand raised if you want to just
let's do that.
Hi, so I had a question with regard to some additional funds that were available through a development at 75 St. Alphonsus. I think it was $10,000 that was set aside by the developer. Is that factored into this budget or is it something extra?
Yes, that is factored into the budget. And that was very helpful. I think Gary initially told me about that, and that was very helpful that he did, because, you know, some of these things, they get set aside and no one ever accesses it. So we've started to sort of lay the groundwork for that. But yes, we are aware of those funds and we plan on using them for sure. So is there anyone else? Let's see, does anyone else have their hand raised? Kenzie Bach. And Allison Platinas. Okay.
Sorry, B, I was just wondering if anyone from the team could speak briefly just about, because even like looking at this, like if the and I'm just brainstorming here, but like if the full basketball court were pushed, so that instead of having that wall that kind of blocks the 5 to 12 play structure, like imagine a world in which the 5 to 12 play structure is on your left as you come down the stairs, and yeah, down there, and the court gets pushed back so that instead of that wall, it just hits the retaining wall at the end. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm curious if the team could talk a little bit about positioning and how you've thought about that and how you've thought about configurations.
Sure, I will let the design team speak to that. Just as a, you know, we've been moving as quickly as we can on this, so we have not been able to give this like a long period of, you know, design reflection and looking at all the different options. So that is a very interesting idea to push it out further towards the edge. So I'll let the design team talk a little bit more about what their thoughts were about locating it here.
Well, I'll mention a few things. You know, one thing we were considering is if we did put the court this closer to the wall, there was a concern about balls, no matter what size fence we had here, the balls going over that fence down to the lower level, which means then kids have to go all the way around to get the ball. That's one thing. The other piece is just how circulation would work. So the entrance to the playground is somewhere here. You know, look at the two options. It's either where it is now on either side of that tree, or we moved it uphill a little bit here. So then if you're coming to play basketball and you're not there for the playground, how do you, in this case, you can go through kind of the more public space outside of the play area to go right to the basketball court. we could probably still work it out that, you know, if 5 to 12 were here, we can figure out a route to the basketball court so you don't have to go through the playground. But that's something we're concerned about. So if, you know, we're thinking this playground, the basketball is more kid related, but we know that adults or older teenagers will use it as well. So that we want to make sure that, you know, there's ways to separate different uses and users, so there's not any conflicts there.
Yeah, I hear you. I don't know. I think that I don't love the idea of the 5 to 12 play structure sort of stuck behind that wall. And the other thing I'll say is just the other interest I would have if we went the full court basketball route is how to think about, I mean, right now you guys have the kind of like whimsical striping across in addition to the basketball striping, but it seems like if we did have that court and just say in my hypothetical, you pushed it back into that position, it feels like you could have at least half of it have, instead of the sort of whimsical striping, like have it sort of alternatively painted with like the Foursquare and other things, so that like when people aren't playing basketball, it kind of is providing that hardscape play role, and whatever part of it is more close to the play area and where we expect parents to be sitting or whatever is like potentially like that also makes it flexible for more uses. It's just another thought from me, but.
The other clarification is this is a chain link fence, so it's transparent. And then at eye level, when you're in the playground, this actually doesn't feel disconnected, because if you're here, you see that. And if you're here, you see the rest of the play area. So, you know, and I think that could be valid as well if that court were moved up this way. But in plan view, it seems a little more isolated than it actually would be.
Okay, well, I know we're running out of time, so thank you. Thanks for that.
Okay. Maggie Cohn says that she does not like the full-size basketball court, pointing that there are other courts at McLaughlin Park and the Tobin Community Center, and she does not support the loss of trees. And Marianne Nelson says she likes the full court, especially if it could be moved away from the steps. So that is another proponent of pushing that away more further towards the edge. And Allison Pultinas, if you have a quick comment, we could call on you again. How's that?
Okay, sorry, I have still so many more things to say. Looking at option B, I'm looking at those 4 trees planted along the edge of the basketball court. And I would expect that those trees are going to be really difficult to maintain in that location. So just a thought about that. I am on the fence about full court basketball. I definitely hear what John said about how it's needed. I think it would be really helpful to have an inventory of where else there is full court basketball. I know at the Fenway High School has one on Allegheny. I don't know if there's any facilities within the Mission Main development, half courts or whatever, but I think it could be an interesting thing to think about. I am wondering too, though, there are so many other things that we didn't get to talk about, and I do like the fitness equipment. I think the amphitheater is a great way to solve that grading problem with that slope there. I am still thinking about the driveway and that you need speed humps and maybe a crosswalk where the entrance is to the field. So just I feel like we're slightly getting shortchanged here with not having you know, things being left so wide open as to what actually is going to happen with this project. So I just hope maybe there's a potential for another open house or something. But thank you for letting me speak again.
Thank you, Allison. And you know, we added in the drop-in session, which is an additional meeting to our standard 3. And I totally get it that this is a very dense site as far as all of the different options that we're talking about. So I understand that we aren't able to give everything its full time and discussion that it probably deserves. I'm definitely going to send a recap out to everybody who is attending tonight and on my mailing list as well for the direction that we're planning on going in. And if you guys have any comments or questions, please get in touch with me. Let me know. Get in touch with Counselor Bach. She and I are in good communication with this as well. So I appreciate all that has been shared tonight, and I hope that you guys are excited for this playground, because ultimately, you know, what we're talking about is we're going to be doing a new exciting playground with great equipment and wonderful use for the community, with upgrades to the field and upgrades to the seating areas. And, you know, it is going to be positive. So let's keep that in mind. But we definitely appreciate all of the thoughts and opinions that we've heard tonight. That's been fantastic turnout. So I want to give a shout out to Marianne Nelson, who has helped us with that. That has been a really fantastic result. Thank you for your hard work, and the design team as well. So I think with that, we're going to sign off. Okay. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.